In the year 717 AD, the Byzantine Empire was on the verge of collapse. Arab conquests devoured their lands, and now a massive Umayyad force, 20 years in the making, was bearing down upon Constantinople itself, with over 100,000 men and nearly 5,000 ships. Defending the city were a meager 15,000 soldiers of the empire. However, in their darkest hour, they would be saved by secret superweapons of the Byzantines. At the critical hour, dragons emerged to bathe the invaders in streams of hellfire. These were the fire ships, which would protect the city for centuries to come and change the course of history.
While fire has long held a reputation as a great destroyer, it can also be used as a life giver and creator. This duality and humanity's fascination with it is best exemplified by our love of fireworks, which you can learn much more about through our sponsor Magellan TV. Their series Pyro's Painting with Fire is a fascinating dive into the lives of those who seek to tame our age-old nemesis and turn it into a work of art. In it, you follow teams of pyrotechnicians across the world as they compete to put on the most dazzling and daring displays imaginable. If you're like me and you've always wondered what goes on behind the scenes of fireworks shows, then this series is just for you. Documentary videos like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch Pyro's Painting with Fire or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy!
Fire has been man's greatest ally and his greatest enemy since long before written record. From the warm light of the hearth and the deadly roar of the forest fire, our species learned very quickly not to drift too closely to the flames. And from that fear and respect came low cunning. In the age of close-packed wooden cities, thatched roofs, great granaries and vast fields, fire became a potent weapon. Such was its reputation that it became synonymous with unrestrained violence. For many militaries, this was a selling point in and of itself. However, there was always a desire to exert some control over this most destructive force of nature. It is in this search that early man turned to his environment. Here, natural products such as pitch, oil, resin, and animal fat proved ideal for the creation of incendiary payloads. Some of our earliest records of this come from Assyria, where 9th century BC reliefs can be seen depicting the use of fire arrows and exploding pots. Over the years, this technology would undergo further research and development by the various civilizations of the age. Much of this activity is unfortunately lost to us, and we are only left with a few contemporary accounts testifying to its details. In India, for instance, the Artha Shastra documents the advancements being made to fire weapon technology and tactics at the time, while the laws of Manu further reveal how prohibitions were put in place to attempt to limit their devastation. It's a fascinating glimpse into the ripple effects of the ongoing evolutionary arms race taking place across the world. Our story today, though, will be focused around the specific developments of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The two regions had long been intertwined economically, politically, and militarily, with various incendiary technologies being advanced within this ecosystem. One example was the Boeotian flamethrower, deployed in 434 BC against an Athenian garrison during the Peloponnesian War. The device featured a tube through which air could be forced into a pot of burning charcoal, pitch, and sulfur, which in turn would erupt outwards towards a target. It proved successful in clearing the walls and was added to the growing list of tools attackers might bring to bear in their sieges. Over the centuries, yet more innovations would slowly emerge. One of the most popular among these was the use of naphtha weaponry. This was a rather broad name for petroleum-derived mixtures, which proved both highly flammable and portable, a potent combination. The Parthian and later Sassanid empires were particularly successful in pioneering its applications when it came to siege warfare. Soon, the Greeks and Romans too began toying with their own mixtures. This would ultimately lead to a pivotal breakthrough. In the early 7th century AD, the Islamic Caliphate was sweeping across the land and threatening to overrun the eastern Byzantine provinces. Among the refugees who fled in their path was a man by the name of Kallinikos, from the Syrian city of Heliopolis. Sources claim he brought with him a new incendiary recipe, simply known as Greek fire. To this day, its contents remains a mystery. Part of the confusion comes from the fact that ancient observers seem to use the label as a catch-all term for various combustible materials which were used in that era. On top of this, we have to consider that the Byzantines were very secretive when it came to revealing any specifics of their new superweapon. That being said, researchers tend to believe that the core components of Greek fire were likely naphtha, quicklime, and sulfur. Naphtha is a mixture of crude oil and other fossil fuels such as peat or coal. Quicklime is a white powder refined from limestone or seashells in a lime kiln. And sulfur, also known as brimstone, is a naturally occurring substance known for its acrid stench and flammability. Other likely components are resin, wax, and saltpeter. But how they were mixed and in what quantities is the subject of ongoing debate. The Byzantines would have spent some time testing and further refining the new Greek fire. This would have encompassed not just the ingredients but also its mode of production and delivery. The first trials likely involved the use of hand-thrown grenades made from ceramic pottery, several of which have been found by archaeologists. Such weapons would have been fairly straightforward to implement, as the Sassanids had previously pioneered their use with naphtha. The upgrade to Greek fire simply meant a more powerful and longer-lasting explosion. The next trials aimed to further exploit its destructive potential by increasing the volume of incendiary payload. The end result was apparently the creation of a siphon device capable of spewing fire as if it were a dragon. Here is an evocative first-hand account recorded by a crusader who faced such a weapon. The Greek fire was such that seen from the front as it darted towards us, it appeared as large as a barrel of verjuice, and the tail of the fire that streamed behind it was as long as the shaft of a great lance. The noise it made in coming was like that of a thunderbolt falling from the skies. It seemed like a dragon flying through the air. The light which this huge flaming mass shed all around it was so bright that you could see right through the camp as clearly as if it were day. Now, let us take a closer look at the inner workings of this equipment. The way it worked was that a large bronze container was built to hold the Greek fire mixture. This, in turn, was heated from below by a flame fanned by a bellow. The purpose was not to ignite the material, but to preheat it and thus lower its viscosity for better flow. Once the desired temperature had been reached, an inlet pipe could be pumped with air to pressurize the chamber. The device could then be fired by opening an outlet valve. The heated, pressurized liquid would then race through pipes and out of the nozzle. Here, some sources claim it was lit by a pilot flame which ignited the steam, bathing the target in a fire hose of flames which set everything, including water, ablaze and could not be extinguished. Reports claim such siphons could propel the liquid around 100 feet, while the swivel-mounted head allowed for around a 60-degree firing arc in all directions. It was truly a weapon of devastation. Operating this system would be a 2- or 3-man crew. Trained siphoneers would actuate the heating bellows, the pressurizing pump, the release valve, and the swivel. Presumably, the signal to shoot would be granted to an officer who, for the first time in history, would have had reason to use the command word fire. Once the device had been constructed and tested on land, it would then be transferred onto a warship. Typically, these large Greek fire siphons were mounted to the prow of a Byzantine dromon. Here, it might be shielded and placed atop a tower for better range and protection. Sources later indicate the devices might also be mounted along the aft and sides of a ship for even greater firepower. A fully equipped vessel would be virtually unassailable. Now, let us consider their tactics in battle. For context, it must be pointed out that warships of the Mediterranean during this period were still galleys, which resembled their forebears from antiquity. Some changes worth mentioning, though, include new methods of hull construction, the gradual adoption of lateen sails, and the abandonment of water-level rams in favor of upward-turned spurs. This in turn coincided with a gradual shift in the nature of warfare at sea. Gone were the days of massed naval battles which had been seen during the Greco-Persian Wars, the Punic Wars, and the Roman Civil Wars. Even in antiquity, such clashes were rare, and combat more often revolved around raiding and anti-piracy activities. When ships did engage, though, battles were typically fought at close quarters. Generally, this involved smaller ships using their speed to circle about their foes, shooting them to pieces and cutting off their oars, while larger ships sought to grapple with the enemy and overwhelm them through boarding action. The Byzantines used a variety of tactics depending on whom they were fighting and what ships they had on hand. The introduction of fire ships simplified things. They were by far the most effective tools at an admiral's disposal, and he would do well to make them the center of his battle plan. In doing so, two basic facts had to be considered. The first is that fire ships were often slow owing to the heavy nature of their armament and their preference for smooth sailing conditions. The second fact is that fire ships had a short range, typically aimed towards the front, and were only capable of hitting targets within a ship's length from them. Taken together, these two principles dictated that fire ships were best used by forcing the enemy to meet the Byzantines head-on at close quarters. This might be achieved by using terrain to funnel the enemy into the maws of the fire ships, or alternatively by arranging one's fleet in a compact battle order which could only be assailed from a limited direction. All who dared to approach would be met with a wall of fire. Here is how Emperor Leo IV explains the principle in his Tactica. Quote, "You will form the front in a straight line so that, when necessary, you may fall upon the enemy with your prow first. Then, with the fire from the siphons, you can set their ships ablaze." Understandably, this would have been an absolutely devastating tactic on both a physical and psychological level. Those not immediately engulfed in unquenchable flame would turn and run rather than face such horror. In fact, Greek fire proved so widely feared that the Second Lateran Council in 1139 AD would eventually decree that it was too murderous a weapon to be used in Europe. But such arms limitations, even if they had any teeth, were too little too late. For now, the devastation of Greek fire would be unleashed by the Byzantines upon their foes and turn the tides of history. Let us explore the service history of the fire ships. This would begin shortly after the delivery of Greek fire to the court of the Byzantines around 672 AD. At the time, the empire had been weakened by internal strife and long wars with the Sassanids, which left them ill-prepared to repel the advances of the Muslim conquests. The invaders quickly seized the former Sassanid lands and began to expand into the domains of the Byzantines. This gave them access to many ports, ships, sailors, and resources with which to now take the offensive to the seas. Arabian fleets now struck across Asia Minor and the Greek Isles, seizing Cyprus and raiding as far as Sicily. When Emperor Constans II sailed out to meet them, he would be crushed at the Battle of the Masts in 654 AD. This catastrophe opened the floodgates for further Arab expansion across the Mediterranean. The invaders were only temporarily slowed by civil war and returned 2 decades later to launch a concerted campaign aimed at taking Constantinople itself. In preparation for this offensive, the Umayyad Caliphate had meticulously secured bases along Asia Minor from which to establish a blockade of the Byzantine capital. The stranglehold was tightened each spring as Arab forces hammered away at the troops and fortifications of Constantinople. This relentless attrition went on for over 5 years, keeping the Byzantines pinned in place, while the rest of their empire was devoured by foes on all sides. All hope seemed lost. Yet, Emperor Constantine IV had one final trick up his sleeve: Greek fire. It had been gifted to him by Kallinikos just before the siege began, and ever since his best engineers had madly been working on their secret weapons program. Finally, they were ready. In 677 AD, the Byzantine fleet, newly outfitted with the Greek fire siphons, sailed out to meet the Arabs. The invaders were overjoyed to finally have an opportunity to deal a decisive blow to the defenders and charged out to meet them. This was a fatal error. As they approached, gleaming dragon heads were uncovered from the prows of the Byzantine vessels and proceeded to unleash hellfire upon them. To the utter horror of the Arab sailors, entire ships and the water itself went up in flame. None could escape its grasp, and all efforts to fight it failed. Some chroniclers report that the Umayyad admiral himself was killed, with his entire fleet falling into a panicked retreat. Constantinople had been saved. Victories on land shortly thereafter halted the Umayyad advance, and a 30-year truce was signed. The temporary lull allowed the Byzantines to catch their breath, with Justinian II taking particular care to strengthen the navy. Undoubtedly, this would have meant further investment in the fireships. The Umayyads too had kept busy. Their newly rebuilt navy focused on the western Mediterranean, assisting in the gradual conquest of North Africa and Iberia. However, the ultimate prize still remained Constantinople, and a second massive attack was soon prepared. They were at their strongest levels, while the Byzantine Empire, torn apart by civil war, was at its lowest. For instance, while Umayyads methodically advanced across Anatolia, Emperor Anastasius was usurped by Theodosius, when the entire navy defected, only to then have his brief reign cut short by Leo III. Such infighting made the Umayyad conquest of Anatolia all the more easy, and soon they arrived at the gates of Constantinople with an army said to number over 100,000 men, 2,000 to 5,000 ships, and countless siege engines. In comparison, the defenders of the capital numbered just 15,000. Thankfully, however, the city featured some of the most robust fortifications of its age, which had been further bolstered in anticipation for the siege. The walls had been fully refurbished, every tower bristled with artillery, food had been stockpiled, the garrison well trained, and most important of all, the fireships were made ready for battle. The Arabic army quickly isolated Constantinople from the Thracian hinterlands, building a double stone wall on either side of the besieging army. When Leo offered to pay the Arabs 1 gold coin for every inhabitant of the city to lift the siege, the Umayyad commander refused. Constantinople would fall here, and with it, the last traces of Roman hegemony. The Arabic fleet arrived soon afterwards to begin the blockade. Because Constantinople was surrounded on most sides by water, any siege would be impossible without a combined arms approach of both a land army and an overwhelming navy. This, however, is where the Byzantines had their first decisive victory. As the Umayyad ships attempted to cut the city off, Leo sprung his ambush. A small squadron of fire ships assaulted the rear of the Arab fleet. All of a sudden, 20 heavily loaded troop transports burst into flame. Over 2,000 Marines were killed in the matter of a few minutes. As dragon heads gleamed in the sun and bathed their fellow sailors in fire, the rest of the Umayyad fleet was brutally aware that the 40-year-old rumors of what had happened in the last siege of Constantinople were true. Horrified, they refused to go anywhere near the legendary fire ships. With the fleet now unwilling to even approach the city, it proved impossible for their commanders to enforce their planned blockade. Supplies flowed freely into the city, and even the local fishermen were able to go about their activities as if it were peacetime. To make matters worse, the winter months brought chilling colds which killed off tens of thousands of men and animals. Supply issues also proved fatal. The long logistics route along the Anatolian coast was prone to attack, and countless ships were destroyed en route by Byzantine ambushers, local partisans or pirates. On one occasion, it was said that some 500 grain ships managed to run the gauntlet, bringing a ray of hope. However, this was dashed when the convoy's largely Christian crew chose to defect. This prompted the emperor to launch new fire ship raids, which seized or destroyed the now understaffed supply fleet and any warships they could get their hands on. In the aftermath, the invaders were crippled by both starvation and disease. After little more than a year, the grand siege force was ordered to retreat. But their struggles were not over. As they desperately attempted to straggle back to their homeland, they were picked off piecemeal. Apparently, over 90% of this enormous invading force was utterly annihilated. Those few who survived would be haunted by the experience and spread the word of the dragons who defended Constantinople. This victory allowed the Byzantines to reclaim the seas and take the offensive. Muslim commanders were caught on the back foot for many years, but did eventually develop counters to the fire ships. This involved fighting from a distance by means of arrows and artillery, or attempting to attack the fire ships from the rear. In addition, they reportedly began to coat their ships in hides soaked in water or vinegar, which could dampen the effects of Greek fire or at least take the heat as sacrificial protection. Some sources claim that by 900 AD they even attempted to deploy their own fire ships after capturing a Byzantine vessel, but these proved pale imitations. Nonetheless, these countermeasures at least began to even the odds between the eternal rivals. Other foes of the Byzantines were not so lucky. For instance, in 941 AD, a massive Rus naval force boasting some 40,000 men was launched against Constantinople to take advantage of the seemingly undefended capital. Our sources recount the event as follows. Quote, "The Emperor Romanus, hearing of this, was distracted by various thoughts, for his naval forces were either engaged against the Saracens or occupied in guarding the islands. He spent some sleepless nights in reflection while King Igor devastated the coastlands, and at last he was informed that there were 15 old battered galleys in the yards which had been allowed to go out of commission. Thereupon he called the ship's carpenters into his presence and said to them, 'Make haste and get the old galleys ready for service without delay. Moreover, put the fire throwers not only at the bows but at the stern and both sides as well. When the galleys had been equipped according to his instructions, he called his most skillful sailors and bade them give King Igor battle. So they set out, and when King Igor saw them on the open sea, he ordered his men to capture them alive and not kill them. But the merciful and compassionate Lord lulled the winds and calmed the waves, for otherwise the Greeks would have had difficulty in hurling their fire. As they lay, surrounded by the enemy, the Greeks began to fling their fire all around, and the Rus, seeing the flames, threw themselves in haste from their ships, preparing to be drowned in the water rather than burned alive in their fire. Some sank to the bottom under the weight of their cuirasses and helmets, which were never to be seen again. Some caught fire even among the waves. Not a man escaped, save those who managed to reach the shore. Shortly thereafter, the main Byzantine navy returned. These set upon the Rus, who had been retreating with their accumulated plunder. Once again, fire purged the seas of the barbarians, and the entire fleet was said to be destroyed. Devastated and with no effective counter, the Rus soon signed a peace treaty with terms in favor of the Byzantines. In this way was the empire of the Romans able to survive and even thrive for another half-millennium, thanks to their fire ships. However, by the end of the 12th century, the Byzantines were in decline. Weakened both economically and militarily, they had lost access to many regions believed to have supplied the ingredients for Greek fire, and may even have lost the formula itself. It's around this time that Byzantine fire ships all but disappear from our records. As a testament to this, our accounts of the 1203 Siege of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade makes no mention of the dragons, which had once defended the city. Their flames had gone cold, and with them, the empire. Yet, while the secret of the Byzantine fire ships may have been lost, their legend inspired others to follow in their footsteps. The Venetians, for instance, were said to have deployed an imitation of Greek fire on their ships, which was blown onto the hulls of enemy vessels through submerged pipes or dropped onto their decks from suspended carriages. However, its effect on the battlefield was never as pivotal as had been the case with the fire ships defending Constantinople. It's incredible to imagine how history might have changed were it not for the development of this ancient superweapon. What other military technologies do you think come close to matching its legacy? A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.